How does Matt Lerner define marketing?
AI is changing everything. There's this simple tactical thing that I can't believe more people are not doing. I get about a gazillion cold emails and cold LinkedIn outreaches a day. And the thing is, they don't have to be cold. What do companies just waste money on? I'm going to upset some people. Save time is not your value proposition.
What can early stage startups do if they don't have an Igor with a degree in aeronautical engineering from Stanford?
So the first step is map your growth model, and you can just figure out mathematically where in your business can you focus for the greatest impact. If customers absolutely loved our product, how would they naturally behave? The number is doubling every week. If your startup will be successful, 90% of your growth is going to come from 10% of the stuff you do.
Startups don't die, they drown.
Choosing the right work is critical. The best growth ideas, special insight where you learn something about your customers that no one else has figured out. Team, just do it, and team, don't this up. How can we win people's trust? Everything on there is anxiety reduction. Corporates should win, but startups do. People in big companies being afraid to take some risks. Success, if it correlates with anything, it just correlates with the pace and quality of learning.
Welcome to Strategy and Tragedy, the show all about how to scale and fail in business. So if you're an entrepreneur or you're thinking of starting your business, then you are absolutely in the right place. If this is your first time joining me, then welcome. I'm so happy you found me. It's not lost on me either that there are about 4 million other podcasts out there. So it really does mean the world to me that you've chosen to click onto this episode. While I've got you, please hit that follow or subscribe button wherever you're consuming this content. It really does make a difference, and it really does mean the world to me. Because what it means is it's thanks to you guys listening, watching, wherever you're consuming this, where I get to interview some incredible entrepreneurs and subject matter experts. My next guest is no exception. So I want to get on and interview the Matt Lerner. He is the founder and CEO of SYSTM, an online-based cohort that's designed to help startups to find their growth levers. So I think this is going to apply to each and every single one of you listening in here. Prior to starting SYSTM, he was at 500 startups, a partner at this early stage VC firm where he helped a portfolio of companies to achieve 250% growth within 12 months. And prior to 500 startups, he was the lead at PayPal. So I'm in very good company. Matt Lerner, welcome to the show.
Thanks. It's good to have me. You do have a cool job. You just get to ask interesting people questions all day.
It's a pretty cool job. Yeah, I'm not going to lie. I love it. And even better, I mean, this is the cherry on the cake here, sat across from you. So
you're too kind.
Doesn't get much better than this. All right, Matt Lerner. Obviously, I can't even call you Matt. I'm calling you by your full name. This is like a...
There's a lot of Matts around. You never know.
This is like a Michael Jackson mode. This is like Matt Lerner. I have to say your full name. Hilarious. We're obviously going to talk about PayPal. We're going to talk about so much stuff I want to get stuck into. But first of all, why shouldn't startups save time? What's wrong with saving time?
I didn't say that saving time is bad. I just said save time is not your value proposition. It's not a great headline.
For context, the listeners, Matt Lerner, I can't call you Matt. Miss Matt Lerner had a viral LinkedIn post which went pretty wild all on this subject. It got people pretty riled up. And honestly, I love it. I really want you to talk about this because I have come across so many startups who think that that is their core value proposition. So take it away. What's wrong with it?
All right. And this isn't just my opinion and I don't like it and I'm like a snobby copywriter. It just doesn't work very well. It doesn't bring customers. So when you're explaining on your website or in your ads or whatever what your product does, people have an idea in their heads of a goal they're trying to achieve, and they're trying to figure out if you're that thing. And it's true, we all want to save time, but when we're searching and Googling and going online to find solutions, we're not thinking about our problem at that level. Very few people, no one ever Googles, how do I save time? Instead, they'll have a specific task in mind, like Calendly, schedule meetings in a few clicks. So instead, it's better to talk about the specific outcome that your customer is hoping to achieve and then give them a realistic but impressive time frame. I worked with a company called Popsa, and their winning strapline description was create photo books in 5 minutes. And so that's not just saving time, but it's eliminating a pretty unpleasant task. because you don't really want to you don't want to save time if you're watching a good movie, then you're happy to spend time. So it's almost more about the unpleasant task. But I think my advice, if someone thinks that their tagline or their homepage headline should say save time, is to think about what's the specific thing that your customer is trying to achieve, and how do you enable them to achieve that in a way that makes it special, easier, faster, or better, and just be as specific as you can.
That's exactly the magic word. That was my key takeaway from that, is the specificity of it. It's just too general, it's just too vague, and it's not compelling as a result. So what is that copywriting hack to help people move beyond the save time?
So normally I tell people that a good headline completes the sentence that starts, now you can. So if you look at your homepage now and just put the words now you can in front of your headline.
Would it make sense?
Yeah. If it says now you can, software for the future of HR, that means you're talking about yourself, not your customer's outcome.
Yeah.
Nobody wakes up and says, I wish I could find software for the future of HR because my software for the present of HR is creating a lot of churn in my company.
I love that so much. And Matt, apologies to plug another brilliant interview while I'm here and only just getting stuck in with you, but it reminds me of another fantastic one I did, funny enough, with a fellow American in the world of marketing called Anthony Pieri. It was actually one of the top 5 interviews of 2024. Have you heard of the guy?
I have.
He's amazing. And so he talks a lot about this as well. So if you haven't listened to that one, cue it up after this. So great hack there with saving time. So use that test, go back on your website and add now you can before it, see if it makes sense. You also mentioned, I think another top mistake is talking about yourself, the future of HR. So how can startups look at it from the perspective of the customer, the what's in it for me?
Well, I think it's back to that idea of a now you can test. Your customers are wondering what your product will enable them to do. And as quickly as you can tell them that, the better. And the more closely you can match exactly what it is that they have in their head that they want to do, the better. I mean, I've seen really successful now you can headlines from, create custom landing pages, no coding required, build an ad server in just weeks. I don't know. Somebody must want to do that because the company's making a lot of money. Become the most interesting person in the room. Host dinners that guests will talk about for years. So figure out the thing that your customer wants to do and just talk about that outcome.
Yeah, love that. Absolutely love that. All right, we need to get into the famous household brand name, PayPal. And I think it's really easy for our listeners, for any other, earlier stage startups, to look at a brand like PayPal and think the grass is greener. Obviously today, such a big household brand name. But of course, it wasn't that easy. You didn't just happen upon this overnight success. I'd love for you to tell my listeners about the moment where PayPal's growth reached a plateau that you couldn't quite figure out. There was a bit of this head scratching moment. You were growing and growing, but you reached this plateau. What happened there? And what was the 90-10 discovery that led to?
Yeah, the grass is green. It's really nice when you have product market fit. But we launched a new product. So PayPal was sort of classically these buttons you'd put on your site and on eBay. And we launched this new product that was like credit card processing APIs. So people could, just sort of like Stripe, you could pass programmatically some card details and we'd give you an authorization or a decline and transfer the money. And we launched, I was in charge of launching it, and I got lots and lots of people to sign up and pay us $30 a month. And after a few weeks, we looked and we noticed lots of people signed up, but nobody was actually using it. And of course, we knew that was not sustainable. So we started working on it and just fixing simple things, sending out documentation, giving them a support phone number, improving the onboarding flow. And that helped. And the activation rate, as it were, went up from 10% to 15 and 20%. And then there were harder things like we needed to release APIs that worked with different web server platforms and integrate with different shopping cart and e-commerce platforms. And so we kept doing things, and we eventually got it up 35% activation rate. And then we just hit a wall, and we kept testing things and trying things, and nothing was working. And then I did what I should have done all along, which is I went back and listened to customers. So I flew out to our call center in Omaha, Nebraska, and we just started calling people who had signed up and not yet processed even a $1 transaction. And the second or third time person we called, I remember she answered, nice lady, and she said, "No, PayPal's great. It's up on my site. Thank you very much. All good." And we said, well, I noticed you haven't had any transactions yet. And she said, well, I don't have any customers yet. I said, okay, fair enough. How long has your website been live? And she said, 3 months. And I realized the problem right there. She didn't really have a business. And I realized some of our customers just were never going to have customers of their own. And that got me thinking, maybe we don't need to activate all of our customers. So what's the kind of theoretical addressable limit? So I emailed a guy named Igor, who worked in our analytics department, a brilliant guy. And I just asked him, like, Igor, 80-20 rule, what percentage of our revenue comes from our top 10% most valuable signups? And Igor, he replied right away in email, and he said 102%. And Igor has a PhD in aeronautical engineering from Stanford. This wasn't a math error. It was a test. And I eventually figured out that our least valuable customers were fraudsters. And then we were actually losing some money out of the kind of bottom of the system. But if you net it all out, our top 10% of customers were still generating about 98% of our revenue. So we didn't need to activate 35 or 40% of our customers. We just needed to activate the right ones. So Igor and his team built a propensity model so that when people sign up for a new account, we would score them on their likelihood to someday be a valuable customer. And anyone who seemed like they could be a top 10% most valuable customer, we just called them and helped them out. Make sure they had the tech support they needed, got through any compliance hurdles, etc. So we ran that for a while, and we had a test group and a control group. So we randomized it 50-50. And after about 6 months, we found the people who we were calling in the test group were worth about 40% more than the people in the control group, which is, if you're doing an A/B test, 40% is a nice lift. But if you're doing an A/B test and you're signing up 10,000 new customers a week, and each one of those customers is worth thousands of dollars a year, then 40% is an insanely large amount of money. I mean, millions of dollars a week in annual recurring revenue. And it was all because we weren't listening to our customers and we were thinking about the problem in the wrong way. And so I call that a growth lever, in the sense that it's a small action that can have a huge impact on a business instead of all the work and effort we were doing that wasn't working because we were asking the wrong question. And, PayPal had a number of those levers that they discovered before I got there in early days. And I guess I realized that every successful startup finds some of those. It's kind of mathematically you have to. Like if you have a startup with 5 or 10 or 50 people and a couple $1 million, and you're trying to beat the financial services industry, the hospitality industry, you're not going to outspend them. You're not going to outwork them. You're going to have to outthink them. And you're going to have to find small actions that have a big impact. So that's my shtick. That's what the book's about. That's sort of become my obsession.
So asking the right question to the right person is what I'm synthesizing from this. What can earlier stage startups do if they don't have an Igor with a degree in aeronautical engineering from Stanford? Like, are there any other sort of quicker, dirtier ways, so to speak, that they could go about finding who to ask, where to go, what to do?
Yeah, absolutely. So we work with earlier stage startups all the time, and we walk them through a 3-step process. So the first step is I'm sure you will talk more about this, but you can sort of map your growth model and you can just figure out mathematically where in your business can you focus for the greatest impact. So your growth model is just kind of a structured diagram of how do prospects enter your business, where do they go on your website, how do they do for your sign-up flows, do they start using your product, do they keep using it, do they love it, do they pay you? And if you kind of map that out and put in all the numbers and the ratios, and you don't need Igor anymore, there's tools like Mixpanel that'll give you this stuff right out of the box, then you'll find a rate limiting step. You'll find a bottleneck in there. And that narrowest point, if you focus your resources on that bottleneck, the entire system grows faster. But if you focus your resources anywhere else in the system, it's going to be wasteful and inefficient. And so the first thing I'd say to companies is figure out, if you're trying to grow, what's the bottleneck constraining your growth, and make sure you're focusing all of your attention there.
What that leads to is the idea of forcing questions. You come up with such great forcing questions. Can you define what that actually means and give some examples of a forcing question?
Yeah, I love questions because, they're so powerful but simple. If I tell you a fact, you may or may not listen or remember. But what happens if I ask you a question?
You have to think about it. You have to engage.
You force people to think,
Yeah.
which as a manager of people and as a parent, I realize it's not always easy to get people to think. And even in my career earlier, I spent a year my personal development goal for the year was to ask better questions. So some of the questions I ask, so starting with this premise that if your startup will be successful, 90% of your growth is going to come from 10% of the stuff you do. And that stuff, you probably don't know it. It's probably in your customer's head, but not yours. So some of the questions I'll ask a team or I'll encourage leaders to ask their team. The first one is just, which work should we do? Because you can't do but maybe 5% of all the things you want to do. And choosing the right work is critical. And so it's worth really spending time up front to have a good discussion and bring data and figure out which work you should do. And then even when you decide what work to do, everybody ends up getting distracted and working on pet projects and reading a blog and wanting to do some random thing. And so my sort of cadence with people for weekly and monthly check-ins is what's the most important work and how's that going? I don't want to hear about the 100 things you did. We all agreed this is the number one priority. I want to hear about that. And if people know that's the question they're going to be asked, it helps them focus. Another great question is what customer said that? Because when people start brainstorming and you have ideas, you get all these random, I read a blog and they said that, you should copy the Clay's new flow or like whatever the coolest latest startup thing is. And people just want to do random stuff. But the best growth ideas, well, like the story I told you, they're usually rooted in some special insight where you learn something about your customers that no one else has figured out. And so I always try to bring that ideation process back to the customers.
Fantastic. I love how already you've given such pearls of wisdom. There's so much gold dust so far. And the best thing about this is the structure, the clarity. Already within the first few minutes, you've shared frameworks, processes, and as you know, it may sound simple, but startups are lacking it so desperately. So I want to double down this a little bit because the key word is prioritization. Startups don't die, they drown. And I would argue, right? It's one of the biggest
It's a great quote.
Right? Yeah. It's one of the biggest truisms. They don't die, they drown. And I would argue that of all the business departments, the marketing is the one that is perhaps the most overloaded, overwhelmed. I'm obviously a bit biased with that. How else can founders, teams, so if we're talking about very early stage businesses where the founder might still be wearing multiple hats, they don't come from a marketing background, or they're just starting to kind of make their first hires. So we're talking to like marketing department of one. Beyond these forcing questions, do you have any other kind of tips or tricks to help get that focus?
So let's start, because often when you get smart people doing things that seem irrational, it's because they're working from a different set of assumptions. So let's work backwards and figure out how do we get in the situation in the first place where you have a team of 10 people trying to do 400 things. Because it happens all the time and no one thinks it makes any sense. So typically, people work from an assumption that a startup is a small version of a big company. So you get something, you get some traction, you raise some VC money, and then you're like, okay. And this is like good leadership. You say, I'm a humble founder. I've done all these things myself, but I'm really not an expert in any of them. And so they start bringing in experts. You'll hire a head of sales, you hire a head of marketing, you hire a head of product, you hire a head of compliance, you hire a head of finance, all these experts to come in. And these people, have spent their lives, they got where they were by being really good at doing whatever their job title says. And so your head of sales is going to come in and give you a sales strategy. And your head of finance is going to give you a finance strategy. And your head of customer service will give you a customer service strategy. And so you're going to end up having, 12 strategies that are all pulling in slightly different directions. Because if you don't tell them otherwise, everyone's going to come in by default and define their goals in terms of their job titles rather than in terms of your business. So you're going to get 12 different strategies that require 10 times more resource than you have. You're going to end up having to try to pick which one is best when you don't actually know. And in any case, you can't really fund any of them to any serious extent. So I'd say kind of push that all aside. What you want to do is get people to come in and abandon and forget what they think their job is and come in with a set of skills, but then redefine their job in terms of your company's goals. So the way I have companies do that is to start with this idea of a North Star metric. And your North Star metric is, first of all, it's not revenue. In a mature business, revenue can be a North Star metric, but in the beginning, you're just still trying to figure out even how to get customers. So your North Star, you can't have revenue without customers, but if you have customers, then revenue is relatively
It's a natural
straightforward.
byproduct of having customers, right?
Sometimes. I mean, some startups get, overfunded and never bother to think about monetization, but most of the time. So forget revenue for a moment, but just ask yourself, if customers absolutely loved our product, how would they naturally behave? And how many people are behaving like that? And then make that number go up. So for a SaaS business, your North Star metric might be weekly active users, or it might be kind of number of transactions completed or number of queries. For consumer apps, it's often weekly or daily active users, or like with Spotify, it's like minutes of listening. And in a marketplace or e-commerce, it's usually some kind of transaction. Like Uber, it's rides per week. So you have this number that increments whenever you get customers, and then you just sort of pencil sketch out a flow diagram backwards of what's going to make that number go up. Fill in that data and identify your kind of rate limiting step. But the important thing is to go to people and say, your job is not whatever you think it is. It's to make this number go up. So if you hire a head of compliance, they're going to come in and they're going to think my job is 100% compliance. And they're going to treat your customers horribly because compliance people don't write very good emails. I don't know if you knew that. But if you tell them your job is to help us get as many weekly active users as possible while remaining compliant, they're going to think about their job in a completely different way. So by establishing this North Star, you get everyone to sort of rethink their work. And then you just want to ask them, so, okay, given this is our North Star, you tell me, employee, new head of sales, new head of product, new head of engineering, how does your work impact our North Star metric? And given that is your goal, which work can you do that will have the greatest impact? And they're all going to disagree with each other, but you no longer need to arbitrate these disagreements. Do I like the sales strategy better or the product strategy better? You can just say to them, okay, product team thinks this, engineering team thinks this, the sales team thinks this. Go in a room, put your heads together and figure out and come back to me and tell me which of these is going to have the biggest impact on our North Star.
And the benefit is how it unites those different departments, right? I mean, you already said all these separate strategies, but also, sales versus marketing is a common area of tension, but it helps everyone to kind of pull their weight in the same direction.
It's astounding. I mean, startup will have 20 employees and they're already building silos in their organization.
Yeah.
Like if you talk to someone who works for a big company, they just complain all day long that it's silos and you can't get anything done. Like,
I wonder what number from a psychology perspective when people start to group together. It's like when a party, right? There's a certain number where cliques will start forming.
Yeah.
And so the same in any organization, wherever people come together, what that number is when they start to kind of break down and fragment. And I think that's another pain in the scale-up journey, but we'll get to that.
Do you know a guy named Dan Priestley?
Yeah.
So Dan says that number is 12.
Yeah.
And that teams can self-organize up to 12 people. And after that, things get ropey until you get kind of to about 50 and you've actually got like middle management and processes in place.
Yeah. I love that you knew the specific number. I'm not at all surprised that you knew the specific number of that. That makes sense.
Dan's brilliant. I've learned so much from him.
And like a true leader as well, always crediting the other person. I love that. So something that I read that you wrote was monetization is easy, value is hard. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So we started to talk about that in the North Star metric. I think people who work in mature businesses, like whatever, a chain of car washes, a co-working space, you already know how you get customers and make money. And so you can set all your annual goals around revenue. But in an early startup, until you figure out how you're going to make money, you really need to focus on getting customer engagement. And so to put it very simple, make the point, getting from, if you have 1 million monthly active users in any app, in any software, in anything, it's fairly straightforward to figure out how to monetize that. But if you have 0 monthly active users, figuring out how to get 1 million monthly active users is incredibly hard. So solve the problem of how to get active customers and get the privilege of having to figure out how to monetize them. But I think when companies focus on revenue too early, there's just so many ways a company could make revenue. Again, there'll be a sales strategy and a product strategy and a marketing strategy. And there's just too many degrees of freedom. But the way a company grows is by delivering value to customers, first and foremost. So figure out who your customer is and how you're going to deliver value to them. And once you're doing that, monetization, again, it's not a given, but it's a fairly straightforward problem.
This reminds me of the whole growth at all costs, aggressive growth model from, of course, your birth. Well, no, I don't know if you were born there, but from your world of Silicon Valley. Yeah, exactly. Which we're now in the era beyond that. And now it's kind of, fallen out of fashion. It's the whole enshittification of big tech. What do you say to that, right? Because that was, I totally get your point with monetization is easy, value is hard. I feel like I could be wrong and could be right with drawing that parallel between that growth model that they had, where it was kind of growth at all costs. We just need to get market share. We'll figure out how to monetize and drive profitability when we cross that bridge. Is that an unfair comparison, or what's your take on that?
Well, I think the tools I'm giving out, again, they're kind of agnostic. What I'm talking about is how to get a system to work better. And I use that personally to grow a lifestyle business. You can use that to gain support for a nonprofit cause, to build a medium-sized company, to build a B Corp. I mean, you can use it for all sorts of things. I think it's incumbent on the leader to have their kind of emotional bearings of what is the change they're trying to see in the world. What is it that they're trying to achieve in the world? But whatever it is, you want people to focus on the most impactful tasks to achieve those goals.
Yeah. Okay. Makes sense. You talk about team JFDI and DTFU, talking about teams and growth. What do those acronyms stand for?
So this was TransferWise's first org chart. So their first employee and first head of growth was a guy named Nilan Pyrus. I don't know if you know Nilan. No. He's still there. He's, I think, the chief product and growth officer now. But basically in the early days, everyone, again, until 12 employees, everyone kind of self-organizes and you're all sitting around at a co-working space. And then after that, you start to hire people and you need different teams. And what they figured out is half the things in growing a fintech business have to be perfect. You can't lose people's money. You can't get hacked. You can't be out of compliance. And the other half of the things really need to be fast and loose. Some of their early marketing campaigns, strip your banker. They put people in their underwear on the steps of the Bank of England and then called all the newspapers. That's risky. That's bold. And they figured out that the kind of people who are good at these two different tasks are fundamentally different kinds of people. So their first org chart was team, just fucking do it, and team, don't fuck this up. And so they could just at least segment the people, because if you try to get those personalities to work together, they'll kill each other. So, so that was their first org chart. But I think the lesson I draw from that is, even if it's not your org chart, because, that's only going to scale so far, it's worth, for any given project you're doing, it's worth having a conversation about what is the expected level of quality versus speed on this project. Is this a JFDI or is this a DFTU kind of project? Because otherwise, most good people, conscientious people, their default is going to be to try to do it perfectly. And not everything needs to be done perfectly all the time. And sometimes it's better to take risks.
And does that apply to different stages of the growth journey?
Certainly, earlier stage companies have less to lose and they can be bolder. But in my opinion, I think companies need to be taking risks and experimenting and learning at every stage. And I think what allows startups, like corporates should win, but startups do, right? And I think what allows startups to win is people in big companies being afraid to take some risks and worrying too much about all the things that could potentially go wrong.
Yeah,
so.
It can become a killer to the growth, can't it?
Yeah.
So going on those kind of different stages of growth, 0 to 1 is arguably the hardest, and whatever 1 means, right? Whether it's $1 million turnover, whether it's just finding product market fit, it's a very different ballgame when you then go kind of 1 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 50. What advice could you give for the top growth levers at those different stages in a growth journey? Quick one. This is Future Steph coming to you from beyond. If you're enjoying this episode, then you can probably guess what I want you to do. Please do me one tiny favor that costs you nothing and takes a second of your time. Hit that subscribe button. It really helps to support this show, and I'm really grateful for you listening. Let's get back into it. What advice could you give for the top growth levers at those different stages in a growth journey?
Yeah.
So from 0 to 1, all about finding product market fit, and then sort of beyond there.
Sure. So yeah, as you said, 0 to 1 is about finding product market fit, but let me define that and make it a little more concrete. I think of product market fit as like a river or some body of water, and there are these invisible currents out there. There's this group of people who are struggling to do something. And until they find your app, there's no way for them to do it. And so you have an app that enables people to do, or whatever piece of product that enables people to do things. And eventually you find maybe a really big groundswell of people who are actually trying to do that thing. And then you get growth. And often when you start, it's almost never obvious. Like we look at these businesses, they seem obvious in hindsight. But when you start, it's never obvious. So Uber was founded by, as you know, Travis Kalanick and Garrett Camp. Each of these guys separately had sold companies for tens of millions of dollars previously. They were rich, and they were annoyed because when they get to the airport, there isn't a limousine waiting for them. And the original idea of Uber was, I want to be able to just conjure up a limousine whenever I need it. And their first fleet was these S-Class Benzes. And their original pitch deck said this someday could be $1 billion business. Best case scenario. Well, it's a $10 billion business because it turns out it's not just stinking rich people. Most of us would be happy with just a Toyota Prius or like an electric scooter, right? So they had no idea what they were backing into, but they found this huge pent-up demand for transportation. Same thing, the first PayPal product was long before my time, was a product that would let you beam money from one Palm Pilot to another. Of course, that never went anywhere because there were no Palm Pilots and there was no Wi-Fi. There was none of these things in 1996. So then they went back and they made a list of like, okay, we can send money from one person to another. What are all the possible use cases? And they made a list of 50 use cases and started investigating them. And then one of the employees, I think it might have been David Sachs, just started looking through the transaction logs. And when you send money, you put comments in there. And he noticed a lot of these comments are starting to mention eBay. And so he said, people are using this website eBay with PayPal. And I said, well, how many of them? And he said about 40. And they looked at eBay and they were like, this is garbage. This is like a garage sale of broken, used things. This isn't our business. So the next day, David came back and he said, I looked at the numbers again, and it's a small number of people, but the number is doubling every week. And so that was the end of that conversation. They went all in on eBay, and that ended up being product market fit for them. But they had no idea when they started PayPal.
Such an interesting insight. I didn't know that. What comes to mind is another startup truism, which is you're better off being a good market in a great market than a great company in a bad market.
Yeah.
And basically to speak to the importance here of what you're saying of being able to adapt, iterate, pivot, because you need to follow that river, as you say, those currents that aren't always visible. In my experience, I think that one of the biggest challenges for entrepreneurs is to be able to pivot. And I think it's a really difficult dichotomy, actually, between being so passionate and in love with your idea, and with that comes the tenacity, the determination, the clarity of vision, all of these non-negotiables in entrepreneurship. And it's kind of at odds with being kind of flexible with it, right? It's, I guess on the surface, it's like, well, if you love something so much, it's that kind of, where do you draw the line between being persistent and just keep knocking these doors down versus actually taking on board these points of reference, these insights, and actually go with that. So given, from my perspective, that's definitely kind of a top mistake that I think entrepreneurs make. I don't think that they pivot enough. I don't think they're flexible enough. I think they fall too in love with their first idea. Yeah. Given that you've worked with many more startups than I have, what are some of the other common mistakes that you think they make?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point. First of all, is falling in love with your idea. I mean, I think at the earliest stages, success, if it correlates with anything, it just correlates with the pace and quality of learning and the amount of customer interactions you're having where you're trying things out and getting feedback and learning more about the market. We've talked about some of the other mistakes. I think setting revenue as your primary target in an early stage can be deadly. This idea of just like hiring experts who are domain experts who are going to come in and do it for you. Also, I mean, for some roles it might work, but for product, for marketing, for engineering, for sales, there's so much nuance to any one company's successful strategy that you really kind of need to figure it out yourself first before you bring somebody in and expect them to be able to run with it. Even to just know who you're going to hire, how you're going to screen them, and give them kind of a playbook that already works. So, I mean,
have you heard about the mistake that Monzo made on that? It's one of the case studies I came across with their marketing hire.
Okay.
It is, I mean, years and years ago, and obviously no shade to them. We've all made mistakes and learnt the hard way, but I read that they fell into that trap as well of hiring this very senior marketer, and they came from an excellent pedigree with all these well-known household brand names on their CV. And of course, when they landed, this is obviously going back, so this is early days of Monzo as well, it just wasn't a fit. And so it didn't last very long. And who they ended up actually promoting was a lowly intern who was already within the team anyway. And I believe that person worked their way up to become the new CMO of Monzo. So that's a good one. I see that happening all the time. That's also reminded me is your top post of 2024 was 4 bad ideas that sound good. Have we already touched on this, or are there any more that we haven't covered?
4 bad ideas that sound good. Yeah. So the 4 bad ideas that I pointed out in that post, and I just sort of thought about like what a companies just waste money on. And the first one is consistency. And it's hard to argue with that. You'll hire a CMO. Oh, we need to be consistent. Our emails don't look like our web pages, the flows, and blah, 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 blah. And like, well, yeah, I mean, if you work for Louis Vuitton, or Apple, and your brand is all about being gorgeous and looking a certain way, yeah, but Amazon's pages aren't consistent. Google's interface isn't consistent. They seem to be making a bit of money in spite of that. So like, it's not, consistency isn't this magic bullet. Like your startup's not growing and now we make everything consistent and it will grow.
A slightly wrong Pantone color.
Yeah.
That solves it. That's not going to be the rate limit.
It's super resource intensive to go through and change all the copy and design. So one that really bugs me is this be consistent. Another one is this brand building. And I'm going to upset some people. So let me just define what I'm talking about here. Brands are critical. But I think the term brand gets misused often to become synonymous with expensive things we think we should do that we probably won't be able to measure any impact, probably because there is no impact. And I think what they're really trying to do at an early stage when they think about brand building is winning people's trust. And if you say, how can we win people's trust? The best answer is usually not an expensive ad campaign and new logos and. It's usually some really targeted tactical stuff, like understanding what it is they're worried about and addressing those concerns. Like Airbnb does this beautifully. So think about it. Airbnb, great, brand, company. They're getting you to sleep in a stranger's house. Like when you think about it, that's actually kind of creepy, bordering on gross. And if you told me that would be like a multi-billion-dollar company, I'd be like,
Or even Uber getting into strangers' cars.
Yeah, exactly. And so if you go through an Airbnb listing, everything on there is anxiety reduction. The first thing on the page is the host. There are 5 stars and little badges and the number of reviews, tons of high-def, glossy pictures of the flat. Every bullet point it's not clean, it's enhanced clean and, close to good Wi-Fi. It's like all the things you might worry about. And even under like, the payment bit, it says, you can cancel, there are no hidden fees. Like everything on that page is about reducing anxiety. But that only works because they understand at each stage of the flow exactly what little worry or question or fear is going to pop in.
That they need to resolve. And that reminds me also, again, we're talking about these kind of top tech unicorns, but coming back to Uber, with the tracking the little car, the icon, when you've placed that
brilliant?
Order, and it's the anxiety. You don't care if they're on Berners Street or Great Cavendish Square or whatever.
As long as they're coming.
You know that they're coming. That's the thing. And you can track. And it doesn't even matter how far away they are, right? If they're 5-10 minutes, it's just that peace of mind. This is where Rory Sutherland has an excellent argument for rebranding marketing. What's your take on that? Like, he thinks it should be either behavioral economics or consumer psychology, which A, is more accurate, and B, would help us to command more respect within organizations.
I think he has an excellent point. I always sat in a marketing P&L when I was at PayPal, but most of the most impactful things I did had no marketing at all. Like the story about Igor, that was a customer service treatment and data science. I had a person on a marketing team help me do it, but it wasn't marketing. And again, most of these companies and most of their growth doesn't come from marketing, but as I said, it comes from teams working together, people with different skills. You absolutely need people who understand data, who understand customers, who can run experiments, who can design user interfaces, who can write copy, who can run ads. So you need all of those skills, but they really need to work together. They need to be informed by data and a deep understanding of the customers. And they need to run experiments and get smarter.
And I guess before asking you about whether marketing needs a rebrand is actually, are we all even on the same page with the definition of marketing? Because what you just described there with customer service blended with data science, to me, that's like, that kind of equals marketing in my mind. But of course, I've spoken to so many other people who just think like marketing is, like everyone's got their own definition. Some people think it's social media, it's making stuff go viral, it's performance, it's digital and everything else. So do you think that there's a problem there as well, that we just don't all have a clear definition of what it is?
Yeah, I think if you ask 10 people, you'll get for marketing or for brand.
And I don't think that would happen with any other department of the business.
To greater or lesser extent, yeah. I mean, everyone kind of knows what an engineer is. There would probably be a debate about what an engineer's role, where it starts and ends. But so when I see people hiring CMOs here, it's usually a person who worked in an agency, worked for a big brand, and buys ads and spends money. I have a friend who's a CMO on the West Coast, and he has an advanced scientific degree from Caltech. Wow. And he runs experiments and plays with data all day. And that's what CMO means in a West Coast tech startup. Yeah, and agree. Like there's just, there's way too many definitions.
How do you define marketing? How does Matt Lerner define marketing?
Honestly, Steph, I'm not sure that I do. I really think about growth and go to market, and I try to bring the different skill sets of the company together. And when people ask me who should lead our growth team, I tell them the best leader, because it's the hardest, most important job. And I've seen that person come from data science. I've seen that person come from copywriting. I've seen that person come from design.
I love that. And you're making me think of just kind of the irrelevance of that, of the definition, right? It's like,
you need a budget, you need a headcount, you need a P&L, but don't get lost in this sort of a priori idea of what is marketing. Figure out what makes sense for your company.
Yeah, I love that. Just a whole different mindset with it. Love that approach. So you've shared with us, as I mentioned before, like frameworks, structures, processes, so much practical, useful stuff on this podcast. They're fairly, like, I want to say like evergreen, right? Like they're versatile. They'll apply to different businesses across different sectors. And whenever you're listening to this will help you. We're also sat here beginning of 2025. I don't quite know when this is going to air exactly. What are your takes on what's going to be hot in 2025 beyond sort of these evergreen best practice? Are there any other sort of time-bound trends that you have on your radar?
Sure, I have a few. I mean, obviously, AI is changing everything and is changing it by the day. And I see that in my work. I see that with every team I'm working with and in every role. So it's still a bit of a moving target, but it seems like the teams who understand their customer outcomes and make the best use of AI seem to be having the most success.
Can you give any examples of the practical use cases of AI beyond the buzzword?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I see it used a lot as a collaborator for copy, as a collaborator for engineering. I know some technical co-founders, really bright ones, who used to have a team of engineers and now they work solo and they just use agents and co-pilots to do most of the work for them, because then they're really only constrained by their own thinking. And then just automating all kinds of processes in the organization. The quality of research, you can now get AI to do research that would have cost tens or hundreds of thousands and taken a consulting firm to help you understand a market.
What tools do you use for that?
So the Google, actually, Gemini's newest version has this kind of deep research function that can do that quite well. You're still only, constrained by the quality of the questions you ask and what you end up doing with the data.
Right.
So in that sense, and here's my little spiel, the fundamentals don't change. You still need to understand your customers and their outcomes. And, ChatGPT understands the average of the internet. So you need to prompt it with enough context and a deep enough understanding to get relevant answers in your case. And then you need to have the taste and judgment to know that what it's giving you back isn't perfect. Just like if you make pretty pictures with DALL-E or Midjourney, and that looks great. And then you notice this lady has 7 fingers and the car's hovering and whatever. Like you still need to know, like, and it's easy to spot in a picture, but you need to know this isn't exactly what I need, and you need to be able to give the feedback to make it better.
Yeah, I think a lot of the hot air and excitement around AI has led some of us to forget that it's a tool and that it isn't a replacement. To your point, if it's a co-pilot or it's a tool in your armory, and like any other tool, it's knowing how to utilize it properly. So AI was that I should have expected that to be the answer of 2025. Anything else you want to add to that before I move on? Any kind of like, what should entrepreneurs and marketing leaders have on their radar for 2025?
Yeah.
If there isn't, it's fine.
There's this simple tactical thing that I can't believe more people are not doing. So in B2B, I don't know about you, I get about a gazillion cold emails and cold LinkedIn outreaches a day. And the thing is, they don't have to be cold. If you have a good sense of who your customer is in B2B, and you can use tools and come up with a list of those people on LinkedIn, you can start showing them your ads and your logo and your brand and helpful resources for a month or two before you DM them, before you call them.
Yeah.
And then they'll be like, oh, I've seen their logo. I've heard of you guys. And it completely changes the response rates, the conversion rates of those campaigns.
Yeah. I can't let you leave this room without getting your perspective on UK versus US.
Do you ask everyone that question?
I actually ask a lot of people. I'm kind of obsessed with it at the moment. But of course,
UK
Silicon
versus
Valley,
US,
American, you're now living and working in London. What's your take on the two markets? You've lived and operated in both places. What's your perspective?
I mean, let's talk about what Silicon Valley is. There have been these times in history where a handful of extraordinary people have kind of ended up in the same zip code and done things together, like the 5th century BC. In Athens, you had Socrates and Plato, and then Alexander the Great, and, Renaissance Italy, Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo and Botticelli and all those folks in Florence together. Early 20th century Paris, same kind of thing with Picasso and Hemingway and all those people. And I feel like, and I was in Silicon Valley from 1996 to 2012.
Wow, heyday.
And I feel
Real
like
heyday.
it was the
What was
same
that like?
kind of thing.
Paint a picture for us. What was that like? Like early noughties in Silicon Valley?
I'll tell you I'll paint 2 bits of this picture for you. One of them, it was kind of weird. We called it the luck truck. But you'd have a friend who suddenly their company that they worked for would IPO and they'd be rich. And my first job, I think I got laid off after about 6 months. The second job, I got laid off after about 9 months. And there was this guy who'd gotten laid off from the same companies as me. And he went and joined a pre-IPO company. And then one day I went to his house and he had a Ferrari and a Harley Davidson and a drum kit and 40 pairs of Nikes. And he hadn't bothered to move out of his little apartment in Mountain View yet. But so it's just weird when suddenly and then I was like, oh, I should think more carefully about which companies I join. Yeah. So part of it, that was weird. But I mean, the thing that's really different is the ambition and the intensity. So first of all, these are incredibly bright, talented people, but I don't think London lacks bright, talented people, but the level of ambition. I was working for a startup and the founder worked insanely hard and he was there all night, every day.
Is this in London, by the way?
Weekends. Oh no, this is early in my career in the Valley.
Okay.
And early, on the weekends at his house and everything. At some point, I found out he had a massive trust fund. He never had to work a day in his life.
Wow.
He was super motivated. I have another friend who founded a company called Udemy, which you may have heard of. And they're publicly traded. And he left Udemy kind of early on. And but he never has to work. He started a food delivery company. He raised venture capital money. He grew it to 200 million valuation, and that ended up going out of business. And now he started another company, venture-backed business, and he's growing that. And he never needs to work, but he's driven by much bigger, insanely big goals and ambitions.
Yeah,
and I feel like most people on earth would get 10 or 20 or 50 million in the bank, and they'd go spend time with their kids and go on speaking tours or do whatever rich people do.
Yeah.
And they're good with that. And I think that's the other huge difference in the Valley.
in the Valley or between like entrepreneurs?
Well, I'm comparing entrepreneurs in the Valley with entrepreneurs in the UK.
Okay.
you asked me
So
that.
what do you think that level of ambition is down to in the US? Like, what is it about the US that, like, what are the conditions that help these people to think bigger, to aim higher?
Well, I don't think, I mean, the US enables it in a sense, like, culturally, they admire people. They just elected a president who got famous by being really good at business and real estate and had a TV show about it, right? Like Elon Musk is a hero in America. So I think they respect and admire people who are successful, but a lot of these people aren't actually American, right? Like most of them actually are immigrants. So I don't think there's anything sort of in the water. I think America is, I think most Americans are not like this.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy where that's the hotspot and that's where they're gathering. And I love your historical parallels there, whether it was the Renaissance era in Italy or the philosophers in Greece. It's just that gathering point, isn't there? Scott Galloway, I'm obsessed with. Sorry, listeners.
He must be in your top 10. Has he
Oh
been on
my
the pod?
God. I'm a mere mortal, Matt. He is God level. But I apologize to my listeners because I fangirl over him all the time. But what comes to mind is he says one of the best financial strategies is to get as close as possible to the money. And so there's a parallel here as well, right? Whatever, it doesn't need to be financial, but whether it's entrepreneurial success or whatever that goal is for you is get as close as possible to it, move to it. Matt, what an honor and privilege. This is like #LinkedIn. I didn't mean for it to sound like that. Genuinely an honor and a privilege to have this quality time with you. I'm so grateful to be sat across. I've enjoyed every minute of it. My closing question, my ultimate question. What's one tragedy that's taught you an unforgettable lesson?
I'm happy to say I haven't had a lot of tragedy in my life, and I haven't had any tragedy in my business life. I don't know if there is even such a thing as a business tragedy. But I can tell you about the worst day of my life and the worst time of my life and how it's made me who I am. So it was, I don't remember which day, but it was a Saturday in October 1994. It was probably, I think it was cold and sunny, and 1993. I was at college, and I decided, it was a weekend, I had some free time, I decided to call my parents. And my mom answered the phone. I said, "Hey, Mom, it's me." And there was silence on the other end of the phone. And she said, "Honey, it's Matt." And my father picked up the phone. My mother couldn't speak. My dad told me she'd been to the doctor that week with pneumonia. They took a chest x-ray, and they found a bunch of tumors in her lungs. And I was 21 years old. I wasn't ready to find out that my mother was dying. She wasn't ready either. So she ended up living about another 6 months. And I would go back home as much as I could during that time and try to spend time with her. And I remember one time sitting with her by her bed, and she started crying, and she said, I just realized I'm not going to see the millennium. When I was a little girl, I imagined, I'd be 59 years old, and I would, 1999, and I would see it become the year 2000, and I'm not. And I always struggle to understand people's emotions and what's behind them and what they're thinking. But I asked my therapist about this at the time. Of course, I was in therapy. And I said, "Why was my mom crying so much about that?" And my therapist said, "Matt, I think your mom realized there were a lot of things she wasn't going to get to see." So how that's affected me is I'm extremely intentional about how I spend my time. I don't waste a minute of my life. I don't do things I don't want to do. I don't wait to do things when I'm older or when I have more time. And I spend a lot of time thinking about how I want to spend my life, and I make sure I'm doing those things.
Matt, so sorry to hear that. And I kind of hate having this traditional closing question because it always hurts.
You get some rough stories.
I get some rough stories, and I don't want to leave my listeners on that note. But I think it is, again, the framing of that is the lessons that have been taken from that. And we do often get so many different answers. Some of them are that deep and personal and life related. And I think that what you've taken away from that, the positive with, we do have limited time. And if that's, those are the forcing questions, these are the way to focus what you're doing with it, then so be it. Matt, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been absolutely amazing. I'm really grateful for your time. It's been wonderful. And I really hope the listeners have learned something new and taken lots of value from this. So extremely grateful to you, Matt. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you for prompting this introspection.
Thank you so much for listening as well. If you've enjoyed this, do hit that subscribe button. I know it's super annoying. We all ask you to do it, but it does make a difference. So just give a little tap and hopefully see you next time. Thank you so much.